Alright, this is your class live to help you with your understanding poetry assignments. In this slideshow, you will be hearing about Kabir, Rilke, and Neruda. Um, Poetry is usually quite challenging for many students. It's not a typical format that we tend to use. So hopefully this will help you navigate your poetry assignments easier and give you a better time with it. When reading poetry, I recommend that you read it multiple times. Um, Poetry is not a type of literature that's simple to understand the first reading. It's usually not taken at face value, and there's almost always a very much a deeper meaning to it. So I recommend the first time that you read it silently to yourself. I recommend that you read it a second time out loud. The goal for reading it out loud is trying to catch the rhythm of the poem and get the rhyming down. And I recommend reading it a third time, looking for things like metaphor, simile, theme, that deeper meaning. So the first two times, you should just try to enjoy and figure out the basics of the poem, and then the third time, really try to get in depth with the poem that you're experiencing. So I want to start with Kabir. Tell me, O Swan, your ancient tale. Just from the title alone, we can tell that Kabir is making an appeal to this swan. Tell me, O Swan, your ancient tale. So he's asking something of the swan. When we go into the poem, the first question that Kabir asks is actually quite heavy. If you reread it several times, you'll pick up on this very important question that he asks. Tell me, O swan, your ancient tale. From what land do you come, O swan? To what shore do you fly? Where would you take your rest, O swan, and what do you seek? Um, Looking further deeper into that, he's asking the swan, where do you come from? Where will you go? And this is actually a very deep question. If a person was to ask you this, where do people come from and where do we go when we die? And that's a very deep and complicated question for a lot of people. Kabir continues, even this morning, O swan, awake, arise, follow me. There is a land where no doubt nor sorrow have rule, where the terror of death is no more. There the woods of spring are abloom, and the fragrant scent, he is I, is borne on the wind. There the bee of the heart is deeply immersed, and desires no other joy. So Kabir starts this poem with this question of uncertainty. Where do we come from? Where do we go? And continues on to answer those questions and say, we go to this place where terror of death is no more. The woods of spring are abloom. I like to picture the mountains and the forest when the cherry blossoms are starting to grow, and it's just beautiful. And there's this fragrance that he is I of unity, and the heart is deeply immersed and desires nothing more. So again, there's that appeal to the swan for answers. Where do we come from? Where do we go? The swan must know. And then he goes on to tell the swan to follow him to this land of no sorrow, where terror and death are no more. So this land of pure joy. So we can infer about Kabir's beliefs of the afterlife is that clearly he believes something happens to us after we're gone. And he believes we go to a land of no sorrow, where our hearts are content and filled with happiness. So again, Kabir reveals a lot of important themes. Now, upon initial reading of this, you might just think, okay, so this is about a swan flying off into the woods and living happily ever after. But with the deeper reading that we're looking for when we read poetry, we can actually see that this is a question of faith and of life. One of the most important questions we can ask ourselves is where do we come from and what happens to us when we die? And this is Kabir's way of asking those questions and answering them for himself and for his readers. I want to move on to Rilke. Not to be confused, I know both poems are about a swan, but try not to get Rilke and Kabir confused. Rilke's The Swan deals with similar questions. This clumsy living that moves lumbering as if in ropes through what is not done reminds us of the awkward way the swan walks. And to die, which is a letting go of the ground we stand on and cling to every day, is like the swan when he nervously lets himself down into the water which receives him gaily and which flows joyfully under and after him, wave after wave, while the swan, unmoving and marvelously calm, is pleased to be carried, each minute more fully grown, more like a king, composed, farther and farther on. One of the nice things that Rilke does in here is he uses a decent amount of punctuation. And something I didn't actually learn until university was that when reading poetry, we tend to read line by line. But when you read poetry, you should still read it according to the punctuation, and that helps quite a bit. So he starts out this poem talking about how swans move, which is really awkwardly. If you've ever seen a swan um, on the ground, it's just very strange and awkward to watch them walk. And he's talking about this clumsy living that moves lumbering as if in ropes. So he's comparing our life to the way the swan walks really awkwardly and just we fumble through life is what Rilke is saying here. We fumble and we fumble until we die, which is a letting go of the ground we stand on and cling to every day. And he compares that to the swan when he goes into water, which can be nervous and questionable. You don't necessarily know what's going to be in the water. But he notes that the water receives him gaily or joyfully, and it flows after him, wave after wave, while the swan, unmoving and marvelously calm. So this comparison that when we die, we have a marvelous calm and we're pleased, and we become more fully grown like a king, composed. And so Rilke is saying that once we pass on, once we die, we really come into ourselves and become who we're supposed to be. And again, it's very, very interesting and revealing about Rilke's thoughts of the afterlife. So again, the comparison of life to a clumsy swan walking, that we fumble through life, we just kind of figure it out. There's no rhyme or reason. We don't do it gracefully. He discusses the fear of death and how we're afraid to kind of enter that water of death. But death will accept us, just as the water accepts the swan, and the peace and hope that comes with it. And he says the joy, coming into our own like a king farther and farther on. So again, Rilke, through his poetry, is revealing what he believes about the afterlife. Clearly there's peace involved, there's joy, and really coming into ourselves. And again, with an initial reading, you're just reading about a swan who's really clumsy and then he goes into the water and he's fine. But the deeper meaning here is very clear when Rilke starts revealing those deeper themes. Moving on to Rilke's Spanish Dancer. I know it's a little bit harder to read this one, but it is really beautiful. Spanish Dancer is a little more face value, a little less deeper meaning. The imagery Rilke uses here is incredible. As in the hand a sulfur match, first white, stretches flicking tongues on every side before it bursts into flame. So in the circle of close watchers, hot, bright, and eager, her round dance begins to flicker and fan out. And all at once it is entirely flame. With a glance she sets her hair ablaze and whirls suddenly with daring art her whole dress into it this fiery rapture, out of which, like startled snakes, her bare arms stretch, alive and clacking. And then, as if the fire grew tight to her, she gathers it all up and casts it off disdainfully, with imperious demeanor and looks. It lies there raging on the ground and keeps on flaming and does not give up, but triumphant, self-assured, and with a sweet greeting smile, she lifts her face and stamps it out with little furious feet. This image is really powerful, and I actually have some pictures later on of flamenco dancing, which is what he's describing here, is this really powerful flamenco dance. And if you've never seen it, I highly recommend seeing if you can watch some videos about or of women doing flamenco dance, because it is very powerful and flowing, and it's beautiful. And it is very fiery, and you can tell there's passion in this dance from the words he uses. Fiery rapture with the snakes. Her arms are snakes reaching out and clacking like slithering. Bright, hot, eager, flickering, fanning out. So it's a very exciting and intense description, and we can picture it if you're picturing these images. Fiery arms, or her hair starts on fire. It's a very wild description. And, again, flame, hot, bright, eager, fiery, ablaze, rapture. So we can infer about this dance that it's wild, that it's exciting, that it's beautiful, and that the dancer is in complete control, and the audience is in awe of her movement. And so I have some pictures here. This is one of my relatives, actually. She is a flamenco dancer. She teaches it. And so you can kind of see the fiery images here. With the red and flowing out, it's like a fire, and it's beautiful. and you can see that the movement there is really quite powerful. And again, with the lines, they usually flamenco dancers, when they're dancing in their competitions, they will wear bright colors like red because it is so emulative of fire, and it shows that passion and that heat, and it's very lovely. Moving on into Neruda, again, Neruda, like Spanish Dancer, is a little less figurative in the fact that there's not a super deep meaning here. He is pretty standard writing. So Neruda, take bread away from me if you wish, take air away, but do not take from me your laughter. So even with this first line, we can tell that this is a love poem. Do not take away the rose, the lance flower that you pluck, the water that suddenly bursts forth in your joy, the sudden wave of silver born in you. I really like that line, the silver born in you. It's a very kind of powerful image, that silver emanates from you. If you've ever heard the phrase, silvery laughter, it plays very well into this poem. My struggle is harsh, and I come back, with eyes tired at times from having seen the unchanging earth. When your laughter enters it, it rises to the sky seeking me, and it opens for me all the doors of life. So here Neruda is talking about how her laughter really solves all of his problems. He's had a rough day. He's seen everything horrible in the world, but her laughter makes it okay. My love, in the darkest hour your laughter opens, and if suddenly you see my blood staining the stones of the street, laugh, because your laughter will be for my hands like a fresh sword. Next to the sea in autumn, your laughter must raise its foamy cascade, and in the spring, love, I want your laughter, like the flower I was waiting for, the blue flower, the rose of my echoing country. Laugh at the night, at the day, at the moon. Laugh at the twisted streets of the island. Laugh at this clumsy boy who loves you. But when I open my eyes and close them, when my steps go, when my steps return, deny me bread, air, light, spring, but never your laughter, for I would die. So he's using quite a bit of figurative language here and quite a bit of hyperbole. He says, I would give up air, I would give up bread, spring, pretty much anything just to hear you laugh. So this is a really fantastic and beautiful, beautiful love poem. He says here, in the darkest hour, your laughter opens, and if you see my blood staining the street, so he's saying, if you see me suffering, dying, laugh, because your laughter will save me, and it will give me that strength. He talks about how her laugh is like the springtime, how he waits all spring or all winter, all year for this flower to grow in his country. And waiting for that flower is like waiting for her laugh. It's sustaining, it's powerful. He calls himself a clumsy boy, and that really tells us that he's very humbled by this woman that he loves, who is so powerful that her laughter will save him. So noting that he calls himself a clumsy boy because he sees himself as a mess when it comes to her. He could be the most powerful man in the world, but when it comes to this woman, he becomes clumsy and childish. This is free verse. There is a lot of figurative language. There's a lot of comparing. Again, the hyperbole, I would give up everything for your laughter. The sudden wave of silver is a beautiful metaphor, again, with the silvery laughter. How he will be defeated until he hears her laughter. And the fresh sword is a great simile for this new wave of power. The blue flower that gets mentioned in the springtime is a throwback to Neruda's country. And it's really fantastic how he ties the poem back together in the beginning, where he starts, I would give up bread and air, just not your laughter. And he ends with that same sentiment, and it's a really beautiful way to tie it all together. And it's kind of interesting because, laughter is the cure to everything. Laughter is the cure to all that ails him. Just as the saying goes, laughter is the best medicine. So again, when reading poetry, I know it's tough. It's not anybody's favorite. But try reading it multiple times. It really will help. Again, read it silently. Take time to read it out loud. Pay attention to the punctuation. It will help quite a bit. And then look for those features: rhyme, meter, metaphor, the themes, deeper meanings. So don't be afraid to reread poetry multiple times. Don't be afraid to read it out loud. A majority of poetry is meant to be read out loud, declared to another person. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in class.